briefly looked at a few. The ones that we've looked at is we've looked at the King James, and I showed you that, even though the King James is as highly valued as it is by many people, it is not without error. And I showed you there are a few flaws in the King James. We looked at it, and I showed you that the King James even has paraphrases in it, where the translators just paraphrased instead of did a word-for-word translation. Then we looked at the NIV, which I know a lot of people automatically demonize the NIV, and a lot of people do it out of ignorance. And people see a conspiracy behind the NIV, and that these translators purposely were there, rubbing their hands together, cackling and laughing, thinking, what evil thing can we put in here? Well, that's not necessarily the case. And though I don't recommend the NIV, I will say this, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. The problem with the NIV is it's a hybrid. It is half literal and half paraphrase. Half the time they're translating it literally. And I'll give you an example. A lot of times they do a good job. 2 Timothy 3:16. The King James says every scripture is inspired of God. Well, in the NIV it says every scripture is God-breathed. That's actually more accurate than the King James, because that's actually more literally what the word there means. Believe it or not. So not everything in the NIV is a complete, total, some kind of a conspiracy where they're trying to mess with you. It just has problems with the fact that it's got a lot of paraphrases in it. But like I showed you last week, there's plenty of versions way worse than the NIV. And the versions we looked at last week, the Message Bible, remember folks, that thing is nothing but a paraphrase. There's no place in there that I've seen where they actually do a word-for-word translation. It's nothing but a complete paraphrase, and on top of that, it is an extreme paraphrase. Usually when translators will do a paraphrase, it's pretty close to the original. It's just, it's changed some, but it's pretty close. Whoa, Buster, on that one, it's not even anything like the original language. And then I showed you the New World Translation, which is the translation used by the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that one, in all honesty, as you look at it critically, it does have a doctrinal bend to it in certain passages, especially verses having to do with the deity of Jesus, where you can tell pretty clear it has a bend to it where they're going to make it fit along the line with their theology. So, now those are the only translations that we have directly talked about, and only then briefly so. But there's other versions that we have referenced throughout this that I think, by us referencing these, you get an idea of whether or not they're accurate. These other versions that we have referenced are versions like the New King James, the English Standard, and the New American Standard Bible. As we have seen, as we have compared these versions to the Greek throughout here, I think those are some very excellent translations. Very accurate to the original, very good to use. So, now we could go on with this more. There's so many translations out there to talk about, but I think you get the point. We have to be careful sometimes. Well, here's what we're going to do tonight. We're not going to necessarily examine any particular translation tonight. We're just going to simply talk about this. How do you determine if a version is accurate or not? How do we do that? What is the standard? What is the rule that we use to measure a version by, to check it to see if it's accurate? Now, here's what most people do in the church. This is what most people want. Most people do not want to actually do the research on their own. They want somebody to do it for them and to tell them which versions to use and which versions not to use. And they just sort of take the preacher's word for it or whoever, and they just go with it. And because they think, well, I don't know how to do this, I don't want to do all that work, so our thinking is have somebody else do the work for me, and then they just sort of report back to me and tell me what to do. And it saves me a lot of time. It's a shortcut. Well, folks, we can't take those kind of shortcuts, because when we do that, we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. And then you'll have some people who say, okay, I get that. I need to do my own research into these versions. Okay, I get that. I better do that. But here's what they'll typically do. They'll go to the internet to Google, and they'll go on all these websites and they'll read about these conspiracy theories of these bad versions and stuff like that, and it'll lead them to doing all these crazy things and believing all these crazy things about these versions. That's not research, folks. That's just you reading propaganda. I'm going to show you in this lesson how to do research on a version, how you really need to do it. Not by going to websites and just listening to other people, but you can actually, for yourself, hands-on, go to that version for yourself and can look at it and can determine whether or not it's trustworthy or not. Now, how do you do this? How do you determine if a version is accurate? Let me just go ahead and just give you the answer. Here's the answer. You compare the version to the original languages. It's probably not the answer you're wanting. Because when I say that, most people think, oh, brother, here he is talking about Greek again. And this is the attitude that a lot of us have when I say that. Oh, no. We don't want to hear none of this. Folks, we're going to have to come down to earth here. God wrote that Bible in Hebrew and Greek. He did not write it in English. That's the language that your Creator chose to put His Word in, and we need to come to terms with that. Folks, we cannot ignore the original language. Out of laziness, out of, well, I'm not smart enough. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. In our modern age, with the tools that we have available to us now, way more than ever, we have no excuse at all before God as to why we're not able to look into these languages. Even if we don't fully understand these languages, you can still look into them and can get a basic idea of what it's saying. And I'm going to show you that here in this lesson tonight. I'm going to show you that it's not nearly as difficult as you think it is. Sometimes we don't even try to look at the original languages because we've already come up with the presupposition in our minds it's going to be too difficult. Well, how do you know it's going to be too difficult? Have you actually really ever tried? No, but I just think it's too difficult because it's Greek. You can't say it's too difficult if you haven't ever even really given it a true shot. So we need to be aware of that. Now I'm going to show you some simple ways, okay? Simple ways that you can fact check any Bible on your own. You don't have to go to these websites and read these conspiracy theories and people demonizing the NIV or the NASB or anything. You can actually look at it for yourself, okay? Here's how you can do this. Well, first of all, let me do this. Let me show you how you don't do this. I know I've shown you this before, but I want to show it to you again because I really want to drive this point home. And I know some of you are thinking, yeah, we get this, we understand this, but a lot of people don't. You do not fact check a version. You do not look at a version and determine if it's accurate or not by comparing it to the King James. Here's what a lot of people will do to tell if a version is accurate. They'll say, take John 3:16 for an example. The end of John 3:16, whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Well, we trust the King James. It can't be flawed. It's the King James. And so what we'll do is when another version comes along and we're thinking, well, I've never seen this version before. It's kind of new to me, and I'd like to see if this is accurate. How am I going to determine if it's accurate? Well, let's see if it reads anything like the King James. We compare it to the King James. And if it differs in any way from the King James, if it leaves something out or adds something in that the King James doesn't have, then they're adding or taking away from God's Word. Wait a minute. Let's think here, folks. King James Version is not God's inspired Word. It is a translation of God's inspired Word. And we need to stop and think that, this version has something the King James doesn't, or it's removed something that the King James does have. Instead of sitting there and putting the fault on that new version and saying, well, they're taking things away or they're adding things in, did you ever stop and think, well, what if it's the opposite? What if the new version is right and the King James is taking away or adding to? You ever stop and think about that? Oh, no, that can't be true because it's the King James. The King James is not above fault, folks. Again, I'm not trying to bash the King James. I think it's an excellent translation. I love that version. That's the main version that I use. And it's the version that's drilled into my head more than any other. But we have to understand that's not the standard. The King James is not the standard by which we measure other versions. So here's what a lot of people will do. They'll look at the King James and they'll compare it to the NIV, where the NIV says, whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And, well, the NIV can't be right because it doesn't read like the King James. That's not how you do it, folks. That's not how you determine if a version is right or not. not by going to the King James. Here's how you do it, folks. You go to the original, okay? Here is an interlinear of the last half of John 3:16. That all those, or you could put that as the there, I guess, all those believing into Him not perish, but have life eternal. This right here, the original language, is what we go to. And we compare the NIV to it. And not only do we compare the NIV to it, but even the King James is subject to that. The King James even is to be scrutinized by this. And we can look and we can see, is this an accurate translation that we're getting or not? Now, while we're on this, let me point this out to you. I've said this to you before, and I can't remember when, but I guess it was a few weeks ago. We talked about John 3:16 in a lesson one Sunday, and I told you that, there's a big controversy about should or shall and all that stuff. And I told you that when you go to the original language, there is no should or shall. Well, here's the original language for you, an interlinear, word for word, giving it to you. Do you see a should here, shall? Literally, if you look at it in the original language, whoever believes in Him, not perish. That's all it says, literally and explicitly in that original language. Should or shall is something that the translators put in there to help complete the thought or complete the flow in English. And I'm going to say this, I don't think a good way to argue against faith alone is by getting on to people and telling them that should is correct and shall is false. Because even if you translate it as shall, that does not teach faith alone. That does not teach once saved, always saved. Because you have to understand here the kind of faith Christ is talking about here. Let's just say that we do translate this as shall. If you believe in Jesus, you shall not perish. Okay? All you have to do is ask yourself, what kind of faith is He talking about here? Is He talking about a faith that excludes baptism? A baptismless faith? No, He's not. You know how we know that? We know that because of the context. If you go back to verse 5, Jesus says there that if you're not born of water and the Spirit, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. So the faith that He's talking about that will allow you to avoid perishing, that will allow you to avoid hell, is a faith that includes baptism. So even if you translate this as shall, it's not teaching faith alone. And as a matter of fact, I think translating it as shall actually strengthens our case. Because if you translate this as you believe in Jesus, you shall not perish, and once you show that person the faith He's talking about is a baptized faith, buddy, you got it over a barrel right there. So translating it as shall, I think, actually strengthens our case. But I'm not going to go into that because we could spend a whole lot of time discussing this. But my point by showing you this is we have to go to the original language to determine if a version is accurate or not, okay? That's how we do it. We don't judge one version by another version. So we judge it by the original language. Now, how do we do this, though? How do I go and look at the original language? I can't read Greek, and I don't got no Greek Bible laying around my house. How am I supposed to do this? How do you expect me to do this, preacher? I'm not educated. I don't know all this stuff. Good news. You don't have to be. You can have a basic understanding of this stuff and not understand any Greek. And I'm going to show you how to do it here in this lesson.
How do you know which Greek version to use?
Getting into textual criticism. Do we use?
I'm asking. How do you know which Greek text?
Yes. There are different Greek texts out there. What most people are using today are Greek versions, like the Nestle-Aland text, the Westcott and Hort text, the Textus Receptus. Those are all Greek editions made by scholars who go through our Greek manuscripts and they see the variations and they make an educated decision upon which variation they're going to go with. What you're dealing with here is you're dealing with textual criticism when you get to a text and there's different variations. Now, we've done lessons a little bit on that. We haven't gone into this too deep. But if you're wanting a good Greek text to go with, well, the text that the King James is based off of is the Textus Receptus. I think that's a pretty good Greek text. When it was made, I think they did a good job as they could do. The Nestle-Aland text might be a good one. And I know a lot of you are thinking, what are you talking about, preacher?
Making up words up there, aren't you?
I'm showing you how technical I can get into this. I'm making it really simple for y'all. There are different Greek texts out there today, but the good news with that is we have tools that help us along with that as well. But that's getting into something deeper than what I was going to get into.
I think what you're saying is, how do you know that the word-for-word translation for that is accurate? For example,
I got you.
it's not an accurate translation.
You're talking about like...
Word-for-word translation.
Back up to your Greek text.
I got you.
That's a definite article.
Yes.
And ace is not into. It is.
Well, no. It can be translated as either one. It could be into, unto, or to, based upon the context. I put it as into there because that's the standard meaning of it. You could put it as in or to or unto. Either way doesn't really, to me, in that spot, doesn't make big of a difference. And that's where you get into something a little bit different when you get into some Greek words have multiple meanings. Basically, you're thinking, well, how do we know that your interlinear here is accurate, is what you're basically asking. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
What we're saying is, you're going to predicate whether or not a version is an acceptable version according to the way the interlinear translation has been rendered. When, there's a lot of that.
Yes, good point. I'm actually going to get into that here in just a little bit because interlinears are good, but you have to understand that...
Don't entirely depend on them.
Exactly. Don't entirely depend upon these. And I'm going to show you what you're going to have to do sometimes if you have a question about an interlinear is look those words up for yourself. And I'm going to show you how to do that because they think, well, how do you know this interlinear is correct? We're going to get into that. But that's a good question. But I was thinking you were talking about which Greek text to use, is what I was thinking you were talking about. But we're going to get into this here in a little bit, how you look up words. Anyway, how do we do this? You have to utilize tools, folks. And I want to make this really simple for you. There's more than this, but I'm just going to give you these 3 simple tools that you can use. And you can use these tools, again, without really being familiar with Greek at all. And they will help you and give you a basic knowledge of the original language. All right? First of all, like we've been mentioning here, it's good if you have an interlinear Bible. And again, an interlinear Bible is where it shows you the original language, and underneath each word it gives you an English definition, an English translation. Very good to use, very handy to have. Another thing that you can utilize is dictionaries that give you the definition of these Hebrew and Greek words. And these dictionaries are very easy to use. You can use them. They're all in English. So if you can speak English, you have no reason as to why you cannot use that. Very simple to use dictionaries. And they're even easier to use now that we have technology where you can, on your phone, click on it, and there it is. You don't have to do page turning. And then finally, I think it is helpful to compare versions. Now, again, don't compare versions to judge versions, but you can compare versions to help you to understand what the sense of that passage probably is in the original language. It can give you some clues that can help you. And I'll explain more about that here in just a little bit. So these are some 3 basic tools that you can use that will help you to get to the original language, and it will help you to understand, is this version that I'm using an accurate translation? Now, let's go through each one of these and just talk about each one for just a second. Let's start by talking about interlinear Bibles. Okay, there's several of those out there on the market today. I'll just give you just a few pictures of some of them that you can find. There's several of them out there. And look at this last one. This is the Kingdom Interlinear Translation. That's actually the Jehovah's Witness Interlinear. It's based off the Westcott and Hort text. That's the Jehovah's Witness interlinear that they have. I'm not recommending that one. I'm just letting you see it to know that they have their own. But you can get these Bibles. They're really common. They're in bookstores. They're really cheap, really simple to use. And basically, again, what an interlinear is what we've really been using a lot throughout this class. And it's basically where you just go and it does this. It just shows you the text. And it gives underneath that each word of the text, it gives you an English translation of it. And it helps you to see, more of what the original text is probably saying. Now again, you don't need to limit yourself to just, one interlinear and just trust it blindly. Sometimes if you have a question and you're using it and you're thinking, well, this word right here, first. How do I know that word right there really means first? What if it means second or third? How do I know that?
It's a prototype.
Do what?
What's a prototype?
A prototype?
Yeah. Wrong.
Yeah. Well, if you have any questions about the interlinear, that's when you go to the next thing that I just mentioned to you, the dictionaries. If you have a question about it and you're thinking, I don't know about this interlinear now, you go to the dictionary. Interlinear is pretty self-explanatory. There's not much more I can tell you about it. That's what it is. Now, let's talk about the dictionaries for a little bit, because here's really where I want to spend some time for just a little bit. How do you look words up in the dictionary? Okay? First of all, let me make it clear to you that there are a bunch of dictionaries out there today that give us the definition of these Hebrew and Greek terms. Of course, the most common and the most used and most well-known is the Strong's. How many of us here know what a Strong's is or heard about a Strong's? Most everybody here knows. This is the most common. And I think most people have a Strong's in their library somewhere. Most people do. Most Christians do. But at the same time, I understand that a lot of Christians may have the Strong's, but it sits there collecting dust because some people just don't know how to use the thing. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to show you really simple, really briefly, how to use a Strong's. I'm going to show you that here in just a second. But again, that's one of the most common dictionaries that there are. Another one is the Vine's Expository Dictionary. That's a good one. And then another one is, I don't know if you can read all that or not, but it's Thayer's Dictionary. These are all good dictionaries, and there's more out there, but these are the three most common that are out there, and they're the easiest to get, and they're the most basic, simple, straightforward dictionary. And if you're wanting to get into looking up these words and studying and whatever, these are three good ones to start with. Okay? Now, I want to stop here really quick and say something before I move on and show you how to use the Strong's. I know when I show you all this stuff, a lot of people don't think it's important that we even look at this because they think, how am I going to use this? How is this going to help me to grow as a Christian? I mean, if I look these words up and do all this stuff you're telling me to do, how's that going to change my life? How am I going to get anything practical from that? I want to grow as a Christian, and I don't see how this is going to help me. All this is going to give me is just a bunch of technical data, a bunch of technical information that I'm going to think, yeah, it's nice to know, but it's not helping me. Well, folks, let me tell you something. You cannot get practical lessons from the Bible that help you to grow until you understand the Bible. Until you have an accurate understanding of what the Bible is teaching, those practical lessons will never come. So taking time to look up words, to fact check things, it's really not that difficult, and it will benefit you. It will help you to grow, and it will help you to get those practical lessons that you need. Now, let's talk about how to use a Strong's dictionary. I may not be doing the best job of explaining it. It's hard to explain using a PowerPoint, but I'm going to try to do it the best that I can. I know some of you know how to use a Strong's, so this will just be a review for you. I'm trying to make this simple so that those of you who may not be familiar with how to use it can get a good idea from this about how to use it. Okay, let's look at it this way. Let's say that this is the Strong's dictionary. Okay? This dictionary basically breaks down into three sections, basically. The first section is what is known as the concordance. Now, the concordance is basically, you have an alphabetical listing all the way from A to Z of every single word used in the King James Version of the Bible. Listed alphabetically from A to Z, all those words. And underneath each word, it will list for you every single verse where that word is found. Like if we were looking through the concordance and we were going through the A's, B's, C's, and we got down to the G's, and we looked and we found the word God, it would have listed for you under the word God every single verse that uses the word God in the King James Version. So that's basically what the concordance is. And then next, you have the next section here, which is the Old Testament definition of the Hebrew words. If you want to look up a word, the definition of a word in the Old Testament, you go to this section, and it will have listed for you all the definitions of the Hebrew words. And then the last section is all the definitions for the New Testament Greek words. Okay? Now, to show you how this all works, let's just say hypothetically that you and me are studying John 3:16. And we want to look up the word loved. God so loved the world. You know, let's say we've been reading an interlinear, and we've been seeing that the interlinear translates this Greek-looking squiggles up there as loved, and we're thinking, how do I know that's really loved? Is loved an accurate translation of this interlinear? We want to fact-check this thing. How do we look up the word loved in the Strong's Dictionary? How do we do that? Well, here's how you do it. First thing we have to do is we have to go to the concordance section and go through the A's, B's, C's, and go down to the L. Okay? Go to the L section, and then you look and you find loved. And when you find it, this is basically what it's going to look like. You'll find the word loved, and underneath it, it will have listed for you, like I said, every verse that uses the word loved. Now we're going to skip ahead a little bit here and go on down to the verses in the New Testament, Luke 7:47, and then finally John 3:16. There's the verse that we want, okay? We find the verse that we want. Now, notice this. As you're looking at this, you might notice these numbers right down here. You think, well, what are those numbers for? What's that there for? Well, those numbers are important because those are the numbers that you use to look up this word in the dictionary. So if we're wanting to look up the word loved in John 3:16, this number 25 right here is the number that we need to keep in mind. It's the number that we need to write down, keep in our mind, and use to find the definition in the dictionary. Okay? So remember the number 25. Okay? If we want to look up the word loved, number 25, where do we need to go? Do we need to go to the Hebrew Old Testament definitions, or do we need to go to the Greek? You need to go to the last section here. So flip on to the back of the Strong's to that Greek New Testament definition section. That's where you need to go. All right, and once you get there, what do I do when I get there? Find number 25. It's going to have listed for you 1, 2, 3, on down you go, and it's going to have the Greek word and the definition. You skip ahead and you get down to number 25, and there it is. There's the Greek word and there's the definition, to love. It's that simple. Now, I know some of you in here know how to use the Strong's, and you're thinking, okay, we know. But again, I'm just doing this because some people may not, and this is being recorded, and so somebody watching this who may not know, this will be something that could benefit them as well. But this is how to use the Strong's in a book form. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I used it in book form for many years, and I still use it in book form even now. But today it's even simpler. If you don't want to do all this page flipping and all this stuff, it's even simpler than that now. I mean, you can get it on your phone or on a computer program where you could just click a button and it gives you the definition. This is what it would look like if you were doing it on the computer or on your phone. If we were looking at John 3:16, you can get a program on your phone or computer where behind every word, it gives you the Strong's number. And all you have to do is run your mouse up there and click on that word, and a box will pop up and give you the definition. You don't have to do any page flipping. There it is. And that's what I'm telling you. That's easy, folks. That is real easy. You can sit in your air-conditioned chair at home and boom, that's it. So when we have this whole thing about, well, I can't look up these words, I don't know Greek. Can you click a button? I mean, it's really that simple. So again, you know, it's good to have an interlinear. Use them, and it's also good to have dictionaries like these that you can look up, and it'll give you the definition, and you can tell for yourself, is this accurate or not? And by the way, when we're talking about this, not only do we need to do this to check versions and see if they're accurate, but we need to do this in our own study, folks. We really do. In your own study, you need to do these kinds of things because they can benefit you. Before we go into that, any thoughts or questions or comments that anybody has on this so far? Everybody following along pretty well on it?
What is the program you have that does it like that? Because I've got it on here, but it don't do it. I mean, it isn't that easy.
You can get
Okay.
the Strong's version of the King James, and you can just touch a highlighted word and it brings the definition of it.
Okay, thank you.
There's an eSword too.
I was fixing to say that. If you want it on your computer, like at home, you can go to the internet, like I think it's esword.com. Just esword.com. And you go to that website and it'll walk you through how to install it on your computer, and it's completely free.
How do you spell that?
eSword.
E-SWRD. And it also is one for your phone.
Right, you can get that on your phone, and today with all the apps that they have for your phone now, there's
Looking at it, is it the Hebrew and Greek dictionary?
from the
Concordance, Hebrew and Greek.
well, there's so many on there in the apps I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
There's so many apps available today.
It's key
You'll-
to the, yes, it's key to the Strong's.
Right. You'll just have to look around for yourself on that. I can tell you which one I have on my phone for the Android. My app that I have on my phone is basically eSword. It's not eSword, but it's basically the same thing. It has all the tools that eSword has. But that's a really good one to get, eSword. And you can just play around on your apps and look around and find a good app like this that will let you do that. But I used to use the book form of it until I got high tech, started using computers and stuff. And by the way, I meant to do this, and I was thinking about it as I was walking out the door, but I forgot. I have a Strong's that I was going to bring and show y'all. And the Strong's that I have is actually something that was a gift to me. I got that from, it was years ago. I guess I just got out of high school. I was working in Salisbury at the grocery store, and I was cutting meat in the meat department, and I had these guys pop their head in the door and say, "Hey, are you Wesley Wynn?" And of course I'm thinking, who wants to know? I thought these guys were going to rough me up or something. I said, "Yeah, what about it?" No, I didn't say it like that. But I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm Wesley." And they said, "Well, come out here. We got something to give you." I said, "Okay." So I walk out to the parking lot with these two guys. But I sort of knew who they were anyway, so I thought, okay. And they go to their car and they hand me the Strong's, and they said, "We want to give you this," they said. "We heard that you're interested in studying the Bible or whatever." And I said, "Okay." And I took it and everything. And they were guys from New Hope that gave it to me. And I got that Strong's, and I meant to bring it at the front of the Strong's. It has wrote in there, "To Wesley from New Hope Church of Christ." And I don't remember if they have the date wrote in there or not, but I got it, and I meant to bring it to show it to y'all, but I forgot about it. So, and that meant...
And you have trouble with your visions, they have a large print one now available.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And that's what I'm saying. We got so many things like that now, large print Bibles, large print things. So, so many tools that help us today.
With that, adult lights back there, right now, the big one, somebody left, I don't know who it is, we had Sunday.
Really?
How would I get that on my flip phone?
Don't ask me that now. Hey, look, I'm just telling you about these apps. I can't tell you how to get them all.
That flip phone won't get nothing.
It won't do that.
But it don't pop up like mine does regular.
Yeah.
Hey, Wesley, on my phone, all you got to do is go to your app store and just hit Strong's King James Version or KJV, and apps will pop up.
Okay. Well, there's different things out there, and you can, check into it for yourself, and I can show you the one that I have on my phone and some other ones that could help, but...
The problem I have with the book, the print is so small, I have to use a big magnifying glass.
Really? Yeah.
To get the number.
Yeah. Well, a good thing about phones and computers is, talking about large print, a lot of times on those you can blow up the words, so that can help. Or use a magnifying glass if you have to, I guess. But anyway, let's move on really quick. Let's talk about comparing Bible versions. I think this is something good to do because it can help you it will give you clues about what the original language is probably, what the original meaning probably is. I'll give you just a few examples. Benefits. Oh, first of all, before I do that, get ahead of myself. Let me show you this interesting piece of information. Using multiple versions is actually something that's not new at all. But even if you go back to New Testament times, the times of Jesus and the apostles, they actually would use multiple versions of the Old Testament. When we think about the Old Testament, we typically think, well, the Old Testament was just those Hebrew scrolls. And for the most part it was, but they had more than just the Hebrew scrolls that they would use as they would read the Old Testament, but they also had a Greek version of it. There were people who came along around about the time of Alexander the Great, and they took that Hebrew Old Testament and they translated it into Greek. And the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament became known as the Septuagint. And that was a very common translation that was used by Jesus and the apostles. So Jesus and the apostles, whenever they were around, they would quote and read from the Hebrew scrolls, but they would also quote and read from the Septuagint. So they actually used multiple versions, the apostles themselves. Now, one thing to point out really quick, if you'll notice right here, LXX, that is the way that they abbreviate Septuagint. If you ever see this, abbreviation, that's what it's talking about. Now, LXX is the Roman numeral for 70. And the reason they have it as 70 is because it was supposed to be 70 men that were involved in translating the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. So that's why they abbreviated as 70 there. But my point is that, the apostles themselves used multiple versions when you look at it this way. And so I think that kind of sets a precedent for us, that if they even had multiple versions they would utilize, then we can do the same. Now, let me show you some benefits of multiple versions, okay? 1 Peter 2, verse number 9. All right? In the King James, it says, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people." Okay? Now, I've heard a lot of people point this verse out and they say, well, look, the Bible says we're a peculiar people. That means we're strange and that we don't fit in and that we're different. No, it doesn't. That's not what this means. And if you would compare this to other versions, you would begin to see that. Because if you read this in the English Standard, it says, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession." And then you've looked up in another version, the American Standard Version even reads it basically the same way. You are an elect race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. This kind of tips you off here. If I have all of these versions translating it as God's possession, and the King James over here all by itself translating it as peculiar, then that's probably what it means here. More than likely, this is the meaning. And to be honest with you, peculiar, if you really get into it, back in the 1600s, when they translated here as peculiar, they probably weren't thinking peculiar as the way we think of it. So, using multiple versions like that can help you, can give you clues that will let you know that this may be more of what the original language probably says here. Here's another example. 2 Timothy 2:15, a real popular verse. Study to show thyself approved unto God. King James Version. Now again, most of us look at that and say, that means you got to study. Put your nose in the book and hit the grind and That's what that word means. Well, it may be implied by that word, but that's not explicitly what the word means. And if you look at other versions, it will give you a clue to that. Like the New King James says, be diligent to present yourself approved to God. And then the New American Standard does the same thing. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God. And so again, if you're looking at this and you say, well, all these other versions translate it this way, then maybe I need to understand study in a different way. Maybe study doesn't necessarily mean what I'm thinking it means here. And again, if you stop and think about it, when they translated that back in the 1600s, they probably weren't thinking of study the way we are, you know. So again, I do think there is a benefit to multiple versions. It can help you to catch the sense of what the original probably was. But anyway, to sum up, things that you can use that will help you in this, use an interlinear. We have several different dictionaries, and you can also use multiple versions. So anyway, appreciate your attendance.